The first time I saw her, she was already bleeding on the porch. Not running, not hiding, just waiting. A bobcat, her left leg dragging behind her like something forgotten, sat in front of our cabin's back door as the snow began to fall again. Her breath was shallow, steam rising into the cold morning like smoke from a dying fire. She didn't growl, didn't move, just stared straight into me through the glass, like she knew. The glass door was the only thing between us. Me, holding a mug of yesterday's coffee, and her, wild and battered and still somehow composed. I hadn't even fed the dogs yet. Her coat was ragged but regal. Golden brown streaked with dark smudges, ears tipped in black like tiny paintbrushes. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were certain. That's what shook me. It's not every day a wild predator walks out of the woods and asks you for help. I didn't open the door right away. I froze, not out of fear, but from the weight of the moment. My name's Ben Coleridge. I'm a wildlife rehabber in northern Idaho. Retired ranger, single, mid-50s. Spent more of my life outdoors than in. I've seen wolves circle a wounded sibling. I've watched moose cry over a frozen calf. But never have I seen something like this. She didn't pace or show her teeth, just sat in the snowfall, her body trembling with exhaustion. Blood pooled gently beneath her hip. I could see now, wire trap maybe, or old fencing, had ripped a gash along her back leg, but that's not what hit me hardest. She was pregnant, not just a little. Her belly was tight and low, the way deer look days before fawning. And she'd come here, to my place. I don't even have a clinic sign, just a cabin, a shed, and a reputation. I set the coffee down slowly and knelt near the door. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was soft. Something like, "All right, girl, you found the right man." And I cracked the door just enough to speak her language. Silence. I gave her the space. No sudden moves. Just a slow path to warmth if she wanted it. And damn if she didn't rise, shaking, limping, and step inside on her own. Like she'd been here before. That cabin had held a dozen raccoons, a barn owl with a broken wing, 2 badgers, even a coyote pup once. But this felt different. Sacred, almost. I rolled out an old flannel blanket, green and torn but washed, and she collapsed onto it like it was a memory. Not asleep, not unconscious. Just finally safe. The snow kept falling. My breath stayed caught. And I remember thinking, not as a ranger, not even as a man, but as something quieter inside me. She didn't come here to die. She came here to deliver. And something told me this wasn't just a rescue. It was a beginning. I didn't sleep that first night. Not really. I kept the lights low and moved around the cabin like I was afraid to wake a sleeping child. The dogs, old as they were, stayed curled in their crates without a sound. They seemed to understand. This wasn't an ordinary visitor. She didn't eat, didn't drink, just breathed in long, shallow pulls, one paw tucked under her, the other splayed out like she'd lost track of it. I checked the wound before dawn, and the moment I got close, her eyes opened. Not aggressive, not panicked, just watching. I moved slow, wiped the gash with warm saline. No growl, no retreat. When I whispered, she blinked. That slow, heavy blink that cats use when they trust you. I wrapped her leg gently and left a bowl of raw chicken beside her. She ignored it. Instead, she rested her head on the edge of that torn flannel blanket, like it was something she remembered from another life. I knew I couldn't sedate her, too risky in her condition. And I couldn't move her to town. She'd made her choice to be here. By mid-morning, the snow turned to rain. The roof dripped in a slow, steady rhythm. I made coffee again, real coffee this time, and sat across the room with my notebook open but untouched. I was trained to assess, to log injuries, to plan outcomes. But something about her presence made all that feel small. I just watched. Took in the rise and fall of her ribs, the occasional twitch of her ear. Around noon, something shifted. She stirred, lifted her head, and looked toward the front door. A second later, there was a soft thump, barely more than a whisper. When I opened the door, a young blackbird, soaked and shivering, sat beneath the porch light. It had a busted wing. Coincidence? Maybe. But the timing felt strange. I brought the bird in, set it in a crate, and glanced at the bobcat. She was watching, calm, eyes fixed like she'd expected it. That night, I lit the wood stove and laid another blanket near her, this time with a worn-out shirt I'd left in the laundry. Something with my scent. And as I sat nearby, she shifted again, just slightly, and rested one paw on the edge of that fabric. Her breathing had slowed, still shallow but steadier now. And for the first time since she arrived, I saw her tail move. Just once. A soft flick, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. I wrote one note in my logbook before bed. Patient, female bobcat, pregnant. Left hind leg laceration, voluntary arrival. Signs of trust present. No aggression, unexplainable calm. Name TBD. But in my mind, I'd already named her Maple, because she arrived with the snow under the maple tree out back. Because her eyes had that same deep amber hue as the autumn leaves I never seemed to rake. Because something about her felt old and rooted, like she'd always been here, waiting for this moment to happen. 3 days passed, quiet as snowfall. Maple still hadn't eaten much, but she drank now, slow sips from the ceramic bowl I'd set beside her. Her body stayed low to the ground, breath measured, but the swelling in her belly made it clear. She was close. I'd helped foxes birth before, even a lynx once. But this felt different, not just because she was wild, but because she didn't act like it. On the 4th night, the wind picked up. You could hear it rushing down the ridge like a freight train in the dark. Power flickered. The dog stirred. And just before midnight, Maple stood. Not a stretch, not a shift. She stood like someone preparing for something serious. I stayed frozen in my chair, coffee long cold in my hand. Her tail moved in slow arcs. She turned once, twice, and then lay back down. But this time, on her side, head pressed into the blanket. Her body tensed. It was time. I didn't interfere. I knew better. I just dimmed the lights further, put the dogs in the mudroom, and sat against the far wall, barely breathing. Outside, the storm was screaming. Inside, there was only the sound of breath and heartbeat and the smallest cries I'd ever heard. 1, then 2, then 3. Tiny, damp, spotted miracles. Maple turned to each one like she'd done it 100 times, licked their faces, nuzzled them close, pulled them into the warmth of her chest. She didn't whimper, didn't flinch, just wrapped her body around them and closed her eyes. It felt holy. I stayed like that for hours, not writing, not thinking, just absorbing the presence of something ancient and sacred, unfolding in a place built from pine and sweat and loneliness. When dawn crept in through the shutters, the cabin had changed. Everything felt softer. She let me check on them the next day. Carefully, slowly. I crouched nearby, whispered her name, waited for her eyes to meet mine. Then I reached toward the smallest one, a little male with a crooked tail, and she didn't move, just blinked again, slow and sure. I didn't expect it, but the runt crawled toward me. Just a few inches, nose twitching, paw resting on the cuff of my jeans before rolling onto his side in a tiny, clumsy sprawl. I didn't move. I think I forgot how to breathe. Maple watched it all, not as a threat, but like a partner. By the end of that week, the blackbird had healed enough to be released. I opened the window one morning and let it fly free. As it disappeared into the tree line, Maple lifted her head and made the softest sound I'd ever heard her make. A low, quiet huff, like she was saying goodbye. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just recovering. She was building something. Maple's world settled into rhythm, nursing, resting, healing. The kittens, 3 of them, each marked with slightly different patterns, were gaining weight fast. Their eyes still closed, their movements wobbly and aimless. But every sound they made seemed to anchor her more deeply into the space we now shared. I added an extension to the recovery area, converted an old storage alcove off the kitchen into a warm, softly lit den. Put in a layer of pine shavings, a low platform, and a window with a view of the woods. Maple moved her kits there on her own, one by one, carrying them gently by the scruff. She still wouldn't go outside, not even when the back door stood open to spring air. She'd walk to the threshold sometimes, sniffing the breeze, then turn back in. It wasn't fear. It was choice. I'd seen this before in animals who'd bonded with a place of healing. They remembered trauma at the edge of the tree line. To leave too soon might feel like walking back into the pain. And the odd thing was, it wasn't just her changing. The cabin changed too. Quiet patients arrived more frequently. A limping possum. An abandoned house cat someone left in a crate at my gate. A red squirrel I found motionless near the woodpile. It was like the forest whispered where to go. Then came the calico. It was mid-April. Rain had just passed and the sky was split with amber light. I was fixing the latch on the old chicken coop when I heard it. A faint mewl. Not frantic, just lost. A skinny calico cat, maybe 3 years old, stood just beyond the driveway, limping, shoulder matted with mud and sap, eyes wide but not wild. I crouched slowly, held my hand out. She didn't run. She walked past me, right up to the back steps of the cabin, and stopped, looked inside. Maple was resting just beyond the screen door, her kittens curled beside her in a pile of spots and twitching tails. When she saw the calico, she didn't rise. Just gave that same slow blink, then that low huff. The calico sat down. They stayed like that for a long time, not touching, not moving, just 2 animals breathing in the same quiet. It happened again a few days later. A tabby with a torn ear, then a lanky gray tom, tail broken and matted with burrs. Each one arrived alone. Each one found the cabin, and each one stopped when they saw her. I couldn't explain it. Still can't. But it began to feel like Maple wasn't just healing. She was calling. That night, I watched her pace the den as her kittens dozed. She paused by the window, stared into the woods, and sat down with her back to the glass, guarding. Like the cabin had become more than shelter. It had become a place worth protecting. By late spring, the kittens had begun to explore. Wobbly-legged and endlessly curious, they pounced on pine cones, chased each other's tails, and tumbled over the edges of folded blankets like explorers discovering a new planet. I'd sit on the porch after supper, sipping tea, watching them through the screen door as they played around their mother. Maple had gained weight. The wound on her leg was healing clean, only a faint pink line visible beneath fresh fur. Her movements had changed too, more fluid, more purposeful. She walked like she owned the place now, not out of pride, but out of presence, like the land and the walls recognized her. She still wouldn't let me touch the kittens, but she no longer tensed when I sat nearby. Sometimes one of the bolder little ones would wander over and bat at my shoelace. I'd freeze, let them investigate, heart thudding like a drum every time a tiny paw landed near my foot. And Maple would watch. Always. Then one evening, the smallest kitten, light brown with dark ear tufts and the tiniest nose, curled up beside my boot and fell asleep. I didn't move for 40 minutes. I just sat there, the sun sliding behind the ridge, shadows stretching across the porch. And when I finally shifted, just a little, the kitten stirred, and Maple came over. Not fast, not aggressive, just calm. She looked at me, then at her kit, then slowly sat down beside us. She let out a breath, deep and slow, and lay down with her side pressed to my leg. Not touching, not leaning, just sharing space. I don't think I've ever felt so honored in my life. That same week, I started building something new. A fenced enclosure beside the cabin, open to the woods on one side, but lined with low barriers and perches on the other. Half shelter, half training ground. A place for wild kits to learn without getting hurt. Maple understood immediately. When I opened the gate, she stepped inside, then called softly. One by one, the kittens followed her, weaving through stumps and fallen logs, chasing bugs, climbing the branches I'd mounted to the back wall. It became our evening ritual. I'd sit outside the fence with a mug of something warm while the kits played, and Maple watched from a shaded corner. Sometimes she'd give a quiet chirp to call one back. Sometimes she'd just let them fall. And then, one day, it happened again. A young Tom, maybe feral, maybe just forgotten, staggered in from the woods near dusk. His left side was raw from an old burn, eyes wide with panic. He should have run at the sight of the fence, the humans, the other animals. But he didn't. He walked straight to the wire. Maple stood. The kits paused mid-wrestle. The Tom stopped just feet away. And then he lay down. Right there, in the grass, facing her. I felt the hair on my neck rise. Not out of fear, but from something older. Something I didn't have a name for. "Ben," I whispered to myself, "you're not just running a rescue anymore. You're part of something bigger. And she's the one leading it." Summer came like a deep breath after a long silence. The trees thickened with green, the streams ran fuller, and Maple's kits, no longer just fluff and squeaks, began to reveal who they were. The largest, bold and agile, practiced climbing the makeshift tree trunk I'd bolted to the enclosure's wall. The middle one was cautious but clever, always observing before acting. And the smallest, the one who'd once slept by my boot, seemed more curious about me than the forest. He'd follow me along the fence line, watching as I stacked firewood or filled water troughs, tilting his head in that way young animals do when learning something unseen. I started calling him Scout. Maple didn't object. By then, the cabin had become something else entirely. The original purpose, rehabilitation, release, was still there. But layered beneath it was something harder to define. A rhythm, a peace, a kind of wordless agreement between the wild and the human. That's when I noticed what Maple was doing every morning. Just before sunrise, she'd patrol. I'd find her walking the perimeter of the enclosure, then circling the cabin slowly, pausing at each corner, sniffing the air. She'd sit for a moment near the back steps, eyes fixed on the forest, then disappear inside without a sound. Guard duty. But it wasn't just her own young she was watching over anymore. By mid-June, there were 6 other cats staying near the property, former strays, injured wanderers, animals once feral now moving freely between the tree line and the cabin. They didn't compete. They didn't challenge her. If anything, they followed. Even the old blue heeler from the neighbor's ranch stopped by. He'd sit outside the fence and just be calm, tail wagging slowly when Scout crept close. Then came the twist I didn't expect. One afternoon, I was called to assist a ranger friend a few miles out. Injured deer near a riverbed. I was gone for 6 hours. When I returned, the gate to the enclosure was open. Panic slammed through me. I ran, heart pounding, yard empty. But then I saw them. Maple, sitting beneath the porch. Scout and his siblings curled beside her. The others, strays and adopted, spread nearby in a loose circle. And in the center, lying flat against the grass, was something new. A young lynx, thin, trembling, one eye swollen shut, wild, out of place. And still, it had come. I didn't move, couldn't. Maple looked at me. No alarm, no concern, just that deep, unwavering stare she'd given me the day she arrived. Something ancient passed between us in that moment. This place wasn't just refuge anymore. It was becoming sanctuary. The days stretched longer now, golden light filtering through tall pines and warming the wooden planks of the porch, where I often found myself sitting in silence. Maple had stopped sleeping indoors. She came and went as she pleased, sometimes vanishing for hours into the thick woods and returning before dusk with a look I'd learned to read. Eyes soft, body loose, no signs of threat. Her kits, though, stayed near, Scout especially. He'd taken to waiting by the gate every morning, ears twitching the moment he heard my boots on the steps. He no longer flinched when I refilled the water basin. Sometimes, he'd even press his side against the fence as I knelt beside it, like he was trying to understand the boundary between his world and mine. One late July evening, I sat under the maple tree where it had all started. The sun had dipped low, casting long purple shadows over the clearing. Maple appeared at the edge of the woods, silent, graceful, and padded up beside me. No sound, just presence. She dropped something gently at my feet. An old collar, leather, weathered, cracked, no tag. I picked it up slowly, heart caught somewhere between confusion and awe. It wasn't hers, and it wasn't from any animal I'd treated. She looked at me, then turned and walked toward the cabin. I didn't follow. I just sat there, collar in hand, wondering what message she'd left for me. A reminder? A memory? Or maybe a symbol of what happens when something wild chooses to trust. A few days later, the decision came. It was time to release 2 of the kits, the bold one and the clever one. They were ready, strong, wild, and curious about the forest more than the fence. I drove them out just beyond the reserve line, where dense undergrowth met an open slope. I opened the crates and waited. They stepped out cautiously, sniffed the air, and ran. Not from me, just forward. I watched until they vanished into the green. When I returned, Maple was sitting on the porch, Scout curled beside her. She didn't look anxious. If anything, she looked proud. That night, I left the collar she had given me on the windowsill. She glanced at it once before closing her eyes. And I thought, not for the first time, this wasn't just her story anymore. It was ours. Autumn crept in with soft winds and the scent of pine needles breaking down into the earth. Scout grew stronger, leaner, but still lingered close. He'd nap on the porch railing in the afternoons, eyes half shut, one paw dangling over the edge like he owned the place. Maple still came and went, sometimes gone for a full day, other times returning with leaves in her fur and quiet in her steps. She never tried to stop Scout from following me around. In fact, some mornings I'd wake to find him curled beside my boots on the cabin floor, breathing slow, as if the scent of leather and old cedar made him feel safe. I never picked him up, never crossed that invisible line. But I did speak to him, low and gentle, the way you talk to someone who already understands. The others, those injured cats and wanderers, continued to show up. Not daily, but enough. Enough that the town started whispering about the place at the edge of the ridge. Folks who'd never spoken to me before left small boxes of food by the gate. Someone sent a box of vet supplies anonymously. A letter came once, no return address, just 6 words inside. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I hung it on the wall beside the door. Then one morning near the end of October, I stepped outside with a steaming mug and found the porch empty. No Scout, no Maple, no soft eyes waiting to meet mine. The enclosure was still. The woods, silent. I waited, an hour, 2. Evening fell, and still, nothing. I didn't panic, not exactly. But the ache was there. Maybe they'd left. Maybe it was time. That night, I left the porch light on. In the early hours before dawn, I heard it. A soft scrape at the back door. I opened it slowly. There she was. Maple, soaked from rain, fur clinging to her sides. Behind her, Scout, taller now, with a squirrel dangling from his jaws. He dropped it at my feet like an offering, then rubbed his head gently against the doorframe before darting inside. Maple didn't enter. She sat down beneath the porch light, looked up at me, and blinked. I crouched slowly, met her gaze, and whispered, "You found your way back." She didn't respond with sound, just stood, turned toward the woods, and vanished into the trees. That was the last time I saw her. Scout stayed. He lives here now, sleeps on the hearth rug in winter, hunts in the woods behind the cabin, curls beside the sick when they cry. He doesn't wear a collar, doesn't need one. Sometimes when the wind comes in from the ridge and the moon is low, I swear I hear that soft huff in the distance. A breath, a memory, a promise kept. And I remember that first morning. The blood, the snow, the silence, the wild bobcat who walked in without fear, who came not just to be saved, but to save something in return. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be witnessed.